Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Fletcher, back in New York City after a very restful and fun trip to the Catskills with my family, as I discussed last week in the Mountain Man episode. I'm back in the city, and things are going well. I'm doing lots of comedy. If anybody plans to be in New York City this weekend, I will be appearing at West Side Comedy Club Saturday night, August 28th. So you can get tickets at westsidecomedyclub.com. I'd love to see you there. I'll be performing alongside Tony Woods, legendary comedian Tony Woods. Also Kareem Green, Khalees Hawkins, Aaron McGuire, and many more. So yeah, if you want to come out and see some comedy in New York City this weekend, visit westsidecomedyclub.com. But of course, this is a poker podcast, and we are going to talk about poker. I've been getting a lot of feedback lately. We love all of the glowing reviews we've been getting of late on Apple Podcasts. You guys have no idea. When you give a 5-star review and a nice comment or two, it really helps bump our podcast to the top of the ranks, or at least closer to the top of the ranks in the very crowded field of poker podcasts. So when you do that, we appreciate it. I also appreciate other kinds of feedback that I might get on Twitter at Clayton Comic. We always take the time to try to respond to each and every comment that we get on the podcast. Many of you have been saying that you prefer when I have a guest or a co-host. And you know what, guys? I prefer that too. I used to go through every episode and explain why we didn't have a guest this week because this person was supposed to come on and he canceled, or my schedule changed. It's just really super hard to coordinate a guest each and every week. I have a guest as often as possible. During the World Series of Poker, I hope to be in close proximity to so many of my poker playing friends that we can basically stockpile a bunch of episodes while I'm out there, and then we'll have plenty of episodes for the rest of the year with guests on each and every one. But the way it works is that very often, despite my best efforts, the only person who's available to record is yours truly. So when that happens, we do a solo episode, and then sometimes I'm traveling and I'm out in the middle of the woods and I don't really have my setup, so I have to do a solo episode. All this to say, guys, I know it's better when I have someone to bounce my ideas off of, but what I like to think about is when it's just a solo project, that you guys are the ones I can bounce ideas off of. And I love Twitter for this. You guys can leave me comments, notes, suggestions, criticisms, praise, whatever you want on Twitter at Clayton Comic. And that's a great way for us all to interact about these hands. And then you can be my guest in a very real way. One thing that was really fun when I was traveling, I got to do commentary for something called World College Poker. Now I'm getting excited about this. I've done a few different gigs for these guys now, and they really have their act together. I mean, it's first class all the way. This one was actually presented by Poker Stars and the Solve for Why Academy. So my co-commentator, if you will, was none other than Solve for Why founder Matt Berkey, who I would love to have on here at some point as a guest. It's just, he's a really busy guy and it's hard to get him. But I did get to talk about the main event of the World College Poker Championship, which is a free roll that is played worldwide on Poker Stars, open only to people who actually can prove that they are in fact currently enrolled in a college or university somewhere in the world. And first prize in this thing was a $10,000 package, something like $10,000 or $12,000, depending on how much a euro is nowadays, for a major EPT event. So that's huge. I mean, some college kid is going to get flown to Europe to play in an EPT event, which is just so exciting and so much fun for me to be on the call along with Mr. Berkey, and we had drop-ins such as my dear friend Jennifer Shahadi, who is also a previous guest here on the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. But I really want to give a shout out to a young man who attends the University of Nebraska. I hope that's right. I believe he's in Nebraska. Nebraska or Wisconsin. I'm sorry that I don't actually know the difference. But he's from the Midwest. He's a young man. I believe he's a junior in college right now. His name is Alec Rome. You guys can follow him on Twitter at Rome for Real. This young man has a lot going for him. He knows a lot about poker. He's got a great speaking voice, and he's good with technology. He shows up on time. He's sober, and he loves the game. So what else do you want? So it was a pleasure working with Alec again, and of course Craig and all the guys. So that was a lot of fun, and you can actually watch that. I retweeted the clip. The poker in that event was actually pretty good. For a free roll, it was very good. So that was fun to to just be a part of and to practice doing commentary in hopes that I might be doing some of that this fall with the WSOP. We're still not 100% sure what's going on with the streaming, but it was announced today that our friends Norman Chad and Lon McCarran will be handling the play-by-play and color commentary for CBS Sports Network, which is the new home of the WSOP. The contract with ESPN expired and was not renewed. The whole operation has moved to CBS Sports Network. So at least we'll have some familiar faces and voices. And I believe the production company will remain the same as well, but it will just be broadcast over a different network. So it's coming up soon enough. And speaking of the World Series of Poker, there are a lot of new rules happening in Las Vegas. Actually, I think New York City was the first. My beautiful city was the first to start mandating vaccination. So in places with high vaccination rates, cases are up, deaths are not. So some people are getting sick, but it seems like vaccinated people are not experiencing as severe symptoms, generally speaking, as those who are unvaccinated. And so what's been going on in New York is that in order to try to control the public health problem generally, the mayor and others have joined forces to create what are they calling it, a vaccine passport or something like that. Basically, you can't go into a restaurant and sit down to have dinner or come to see my comedy show this weekend without proving that you are vaccinated by showing your actual vaccine record. Now that's, a little controversial. Some people feel like this is a violation of our freedoms or of our personal rights as Americans, etc., etc. Regardless of how you feel about it politically, this is happening, and it's happening in Las Vegas now, where employees at MGM and other companies are now being forced to be vaccinated, or they're not allowed to work there anymore. If you want to attend the big electronics convention in the winter, CES, you will need to show proof of vaccination in order to walk in. So this is happening in various venues and events. And another one, Life is Beautiful. It's a big festival that happens every year. They're doing it this year, September 17th to 19th. In Las Vegas, guests will need to provide proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test in order to attend the event. So again, I'm not going to get political about where I stand on whether this is a violation of your rights as an American citizen or not, but I just think that as poker players, we need to see what's coming. It would be, to me, a shock if the World Series of Poker doesn't follow suit. All of these other events in Vegas are requiring proof of vaccination for all participants. They haven't announced that yet. This is 100% speculative on my part, but anybody that wants to take action on it, I'm willing to lay some odds. So hit me up on Twitter with your best offer at Clayton Comic. I think we're going to be showing our vaccine cards at the tables, just like we have to show our players' cards and IDs. So I think this year we're going to end up turning over 3 pieces of documentation, not just the usual 2. All right, now before we get to strategy, I just wanted to put one finishing touch on the continuing saga of Scott Robbins, our friend that came on and actually was gracious enough to come on the podcast and talk to us about his being banned from the Borgata after having made a comment about wanting to jump from the window, or what happens if I jump from a window, or as he put it, a light-hearted comment to that effect. Well, several of you have sent me news stories from back in 2019 where, and actually a pretty famous, pretty well-known beach volleyball player by the name of Eric Zahn actually did jump from his hotel room at the Borgata Hotel and Casino from the 29th floor and jumped to his death. Apparently, he used a hammer to break open the window and died in an apparent suicide. Now, I don't imagine that Scott Robbins was familiar with this story when he made his quote-unquote lighthearted comment, but to me, I would think that given that his story took place in 2020, less than 1 year after Mr. Zahn tragically died, by the same exact method about which Mr. Robbins was making an allegedly lighthearted comment, I would understand a little bit more why the executives at the Borgata, they want to take any comment that seems to include even the slightest possibility of a suicide threat very seriously. I didn't have that information. Somehow I had never heard Eric Zahn's story until some of you were kind enough to share it with me. But I think it does kind of paint the Scott Robbins situation in a slightly different light. And if your take on the whole thing in the first place was that perhaps the Borgata had overreacted, I think you might feel differently in light of this information. So, the more you know, the better. And I think that should be my final bit of reporting on the curious case of Scott Robbins. I want to get to strategy, guys, and I know you do too. I have two hands. The general theme today is going to be what to do when you have a made hand. Now, most of the hands that I go over on this podcast, I'm bluffing because usually I don't have anything, and usually when I don't have anything, I try to win the pot anyway, and that means I have to bluff. But in these two hands that I've selected today, and these are going to be coming from a tournament that I played over the weekend on ACR, in both of these hands, I am at or near the top of my range. And we're going to talk about how we should be playing when we have a very strong hand. This is the most fun thing in all of the game. There's no stress when you're like when you're bluffing and you're worried, oh gosh, I sure hope he doesn't call. And when you are value betting with what you think is the nuts or close to it, it's to me, it's a lot more fun. It's less stressful because I'm not lying. Anyway, we're going to talk about two of these hands. But first, I want to remind you about our wonderful sponsor, Liquid Death. Now, you've probably seen Liquid Death. It's a can. It looks like a beer can. You might have seen it at Whole Foods or 7-Eleven. It's mixed in with the water bottles because it's not a beer can at all. There's actually pure, clean, fresh mountain spring water in that can. It looks like you're drinking something a lot more hardcore. And I love this company because they're very irreverent. They have a great sense of humor. And most importantly to me, they're doing something good for the environment. I mean, you guys probably know the stats. 90% of all plastic that is quote unquote recycled, in other words, placed into a recycling bin, actually doesn't end up getting recycled because nobody makes money recycling plastic bottles. So it all ends up in the landfill, except for about 10% of it actually ends up getting recycled. So 90% of those water bottles end up hurting the environment in the same way that they would if we threw them directly into the trash bin. Liquid Death is helping solve that problem. Same exact mountain spring water in an aluminum can, which is infinitely recyclable, and the people that do recycle aluminum actually make money from it. And this is America after all. Follow the money. Liquid Death is leading the charge towards all of us breaking our plastic addiction. Aluminum is just better. Visit liquiddeath.com liquiddeath.com. All right, thank you for your sponsorship, Liquid Death. And now, let's talk about this hand. On ACR, there's a $215 PKO. Now, you guys know I love the progressive knockout tournament. This one has, I think, 6 or 7 different starting flights, $1 million guarantee, and on down the line. This is a pretty big tournament, although it's not on par with the Venom that we talked about, I guess, 2 or 3 months ago now. It is definitely a pretty serious tournament, and a lot of players of all levels seem to enter these big events on ACR. And so the very first hand that I played in this tournament it wasn't the first hand of the tournament, but it was the first hand I played. I think this was from level 2, so pretty early on. And this hand is from one of the events they call the BOSS, the BOSS, the Big Online Super Series. You know, I always laugh. These companies, they got to figure out what to call their tournaments, and they just have to make each one more impressive than the other. So they use these really super macho names like the Venom and the Boss, the Goliath, the Mega Monster Truck Rally, whatever. Anyway, most players at the table have just their initial 100K starting stack, although there is one player at the table. It's a 7-handed table right now, one empty seat, and the button only has 30K, so that is something to consider. We are under the gun with 2 black 8s, the 8 of spades and the 8 of clubs. At any table, this is a mandatory open, but at a 7-handed table, you absolutely have to open. I mean, okay, if you have some kind of weird strategy where you like to put hands like this into your under the gun limp and then re-raise, back raise, whatever you want to call it, kind of range, that's fine. You're too tricky and fancy for me. I don't understand all that. I'm just going to open, and I just do a min raise here. So the blinds are 400, 800, and there is a 100 ante per player, and so we just make it 1600, and the action folds around to the hijack. And again, this is the first hand we played at this table, so I don't have any reads on any of my opponents, no familiar names or anyone that I have a lot of hand history with. So the hijack 3 bets to 5,600, and he's actually got 117K. So he's been doing okay early on in this event, and now he's 3-betting us here. It folds back around to us. Again, we have pocket 8s, and now we have a decision. I don't believe in folding in this situation. I mean, if you're not going to call at least with pocket 8s, then I just think you are too exploitable, especially you're raising from up front. You're getting 3-bet. I mean, we're deep enough. Even if you're pretty sure the guy has a bigger pair than you should still be calling, because if you flop a set, you should be able to win at least a pretty big pot with it. So the implied odds are there. But yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure that we're beat here. Wouldn't a lot of players in late position make a 3-bet with a hand like ace-queen, ace-king, possibly other suited aces like ace-5, maybe even a suited connector or 2? I mean, yeah, you're not going to very often see a 3-bet from like pocket 6s or pocket 7s, but that doesn't mean that we're beat. And all in all, we're just too deep to fold, even if we do think there's a great chance we're behind. But we don't have any information about our opponent, so how can we even put him on necessarily having 8s beat? So to me, it's a pretty clear call. But let's talk about possibly 3-betting. Like, we're supposed to have a really strong range. We're raising from under the gun. Now, yeah, it's a 7-handed table, so our range should theoretically be a little wider than at a 9 or 10-handed table, but still not including very much garbage at all from early position. So there is a case to be made for putting in the 3-bet here. I should say the 4-bet, maintaining control, possibly taking it down, finding out how far behind we actually are, and all of that. But I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to flat with this hand. I would put into my 4-betting range hands like probably, you could start thinking about it with 10s, jacks, queens, kings, aces, obviously, ace, king, ace, queen, suited or unsuited, maybe once in a while with ace, jack suited, although that becomes a bit iffy. And then for bluffs, I might do it with like 8-7 of diamonds and 9-8 of spades and ace-5 of clubs. Just have a few bluffs because you can't put yourself in that exploitable position in a medium to high stakes buy-in like this one. Therefore, you do need to have a few bluffs in there. I don't really want to 4-bet with my eights. I'm just going to call and let's see a flop. We're going to be heads up here, out of position, holding 2 black eights, and with 13K in the pot, and Hero now having about 95K behind, the flop comes Jack of spades, 5 of diamonds, Trey of spades. Jack 5 Trey with 2 diamonds, and we have 2 black eights. I'm never leading here. This guy took the lead pre-flop, so I'm going to check to him 100% of the time and let him decide whether or not he feels like betting. So we check it over, and Villain puts in only $32.75 into the 13,100 pot. So he had raised to 5,600 pre-flop, and now he's making a decidedly tiny bet here on the flop. I don't really like his bet sizing no matter what he has. I don't think that he's going to get too many folds out of me when I've already raised and defended my raise to his 3-bet. I don't think 32.75 is getting very much of my range to fold. I'm having trouble now thinking of a hand that I would fold for this bet. Even out of position, I'm probably calling with 75 to 80% of my range at least. So, you might think that's a leak in my game, but, when they price me in, I stay in. It's that simple. So we're going to call here. This is just not compelling enough for me to throw my eights away. And really the amount of value he's squeezing out of me if he's got me beat right now is pretty small. And that's why in his shoes, I prefer a larger sizing, especially having been the pre-flop 3-better. There's a difference to me between being a 3-better who gets called and being just a raiser who gets called. I didn't call this from out of the big blind. I announced under the gun that I have a hand and then called your raise. He should be betting bigger to get me to call with more of my big hands that are not quite as big as his. So, I don't like the sizing here. I can check raise it, actually. I mean, it's not a terrible idea to check raise it. The problem with that, though, is I can't really get called by worse. And there are really only a few hands that are beating me that will fold to the check raise. Mostly pocket 9s, pocket 10s. I don't think if he's got a pair of jacks or better that he can really fold, even if we check raise here. I mean, he might slow down a bit in that case, but where does that path lead? Honestly, it takes us down the path of turning these pocket 8s into a bluff, which they're not. They actually play better from here as a bluff catcher for those times when our opponent decides to keep barreling with a hand like ace queen or ace king, especially when he has a diamond and then another diamond hits the turn and we check again and he bets again and we can call again with the eights. I mean, this is a perfect medium strength hand which should mostly be used as a bluff catcher and not as a bluff. So we just call, and now with just under 20,000 in the middle, the turn comes and it's the 8 of hearts, giving us 3 of a kind. What a beautiful card this is. So our board is now Jack 5, Trey 8 with 2 diamonds, and Hero has 2 8s, 3 8s now. So what to do? You could lead here. You make your hand, you just bet right out. It would certainly confuse our opponent. So now at this point, when we make 3 of a kind, we're actually hoping our opponent has a fairly big hand of his own. Ace jack, pocket queens, pocket kings, pocket aces. That's really the value range that we're targeting. I mean, obviously, in a perfect world, he's going to be sitting there with pocket 5s or pocket trays and we'll have a set over set situation. But I just don't think that those hands will be 3-betting pre-flop from the hijack very often on one of the first hands of the tournament. So I'm not too optimistic that those hands are going to show up. So it's really about trying to figure out the best way to get value from his top pair and over pair hands in his range? Or is it? I would like to get value from those hands. I would also like to continue allowing this opponent to bluff. So I believe that some of his range for making this small C bet on the flop will include two big cards, maybe one of which is a big diamond. Remember, there's two diamonds on the flop. So because of that, I think checking here is actually better than leading out, because when we lead out and he just has something like, let's say, king, queen with the queen of diamonds, he may have bluffed that card again on the turn, possibly, but there's no way he can call a bet on the turn. So against hands like that one, leading out simply allows our opponent to play perfectly against us, which is something we don't want to do. So I think checking is better overall, and that's what I decided to do. Even though I jumped a little when that 8 hit the turn, I decided to check, and into a pot of 19,650, Villain bets 14,500. So that's a big bet, guys. That's like 3/4 of the pot here on the turn. So whereas his flop bet was tiny, his turn bet is very large. So now I start to feel optimistic. Like maybe this guy does have pocket aces or pocket kings, something else that he might have a lot of trouble folding if we raise. So I decide to check raise. I make it 39,300, leaving myself with about a half pot size bet left. He's got about 17K more than I have in my stack, and he calls this check raise rather quickly. So I'm getting excited now. I mean, if I can manage to double up this early in this tournament, if I can get all these chips in and called on the river, I'm going to be so happy, because having everybody covered in a PKO is a huge advantage, because all of those bounties, remember the bounties in this format represent a full 1/2 of the prize pool. It's not like a tournament where it's like a $100 buy-in but a $20 bounty. This is 50% of the prize pool is just in the bounties. And having everybody covered early will allow me to take those risks, to take the worst of it once in a while if somebody has a sizable bounty, and then I can start to build up my stack if I get lucky a few times that way, collecting that money, banking those bounties. That's how you make money in these tournaments. It's one of the most misunderstood formats in all of poker, and maybe that's one reason I like playing these events so much. So I start dreaming, putting my head in the clouds and imagining that I'm about to get a full double here with my 3/8. And sure enough, he does call. And like I said, after he called, I had about a half pot size bet behind. So this is pretty doable here, especially if he's got the pocket aces. It's so hard to fold that hand when you know nothing about your opponent, as this player probably knows nothing about me, let's be honest. So I'm thrilled when he calls, and then the 9 of spades hits the turn for a final board of Jack, 5, Trey, 8, 9. No flush came in. And so I continue and shove 51K into 98K. And after a very long tank, I mean over a minute, came off of this guy's 2-minute time bank, and he did fold. So that was a bit disappointing. I don't know really how else I could have played it. I mean, you could say I can just lead the turn and bet the river, but even then I'm not going to get much more than what I managed to get with my check raise on the turn. Let me know your thoughts on this one. Again, Twitter at Clayton Comic. Let me know if you would have played your pocket eights a little bit differently. Does anybody want to 4-bet pre-flop, or is that just too wild and crazy for you, even at a 7-handed table? Do you prefer leading the turn, or do you like my check raise? I haven't run this one through a solver. I know I can do that, but I just played this hand the other day and I haven't had a chance to do a full review yet. So you guys, give me your input. Let me know what you think, or let me know what your solver says on Twitter. And before we get to our next hand history, in which, again, Clayton will end up making a hand for once, or for twice, as the case may be, I want to talk to you quickly about Tournament Poker Edge. This is the most well-organized, most affordable, most supportive training site that I know of. Tournament Poker Edge. We've got the coaches. We've got Andrew Brokus, Colin Moshman, Alex Fitzgerald, Casey Jarzabek, Daryl Jace, Jared Smith, and on and on. So many brilliant minds coming together on one website where you can actually be a member for as little as $25 per month with your annual subscription. We've got literally thousands of hours of video for you to watch if you're planning on playing in this year's World Series of Poker main event out in Vegas in the fall. So you won't be sweaty like we usually are in July. This training site will help you get ready. And right now, you can get $10 off of your first month when you sign up using promo code PODCAST. Put it in all caps. I don't know if you have to, but it's more fun that way anyway. PODCAST podcast. And then they'll know that you heard about it from me, and that will help me continue to bring this content for free to you. All right, so here's hand number 2. Same tournament. A long time after that first hand. Now the blinds were up to 501K with a 125 ante. So I guess it wasn't actually that much longer. It was just like the next level, or maybe the level after that. I think it's 2 levels after that other one. But this tournament has a long structure, 15-minute blinds. It does feel like quite a while online because you get so many hands in that 15-minute period. So anyway, it's 501K with the 125 ante. At this point, the average stack is 115, and we have 160. So we're doing great. We're actually at the same table that we were at in the other hand. We now have the whole table covered, mostly as a result of that hand that we just discussed, where we turned the set of 8s. 3 folds to us in the hijack position, and we've got the ace of clubs, 8 of clubs, ace 8 of clubs. So now when you are in the hijack, you can decide not to open this hand at all. That's a little bit tight for me, but I know that some players prefer to play these kinds of medium suited aces only from late position, and the hijack might not be late enough for those players. I get it, but I like to open here. I feel like 3 folds is plenty, and I'm in late enough position that I will be able to navigate the murky waters if I happen to flop an ace and I'm unsure, if I'm not quite in position and I don't know if my kicker is good. I can figure that stuff out most of the time, so I'm willing to take these kind of risks. If you prefer to only open this hand from the cutoff or even only the button, that's fine with me, but I'm going to go ahead and open it here. I just want to be clear, though, that this is optional, and when you see a player with a 23, 24% VPIP, as opposed to a player with like a 15 or a 16, this is kind of where a lot of that range comes from, is these hands that you actually don't have to open. There's nothing mandatory about opening this hand from this position, but those of us that are a little bit looser, we will. Here I am in the hijack with a suited ace 8, and I'm going to open. So we go ahead and make it 2,500. Now, at a tougher table, I might not play this hand at all. If I didn't have everybody covered, that would be another reason for me to maybe not want to play this hand. But the circumstances, they dictate that I should open it. Number one, I have several stacks at my table that are in the 40 to 60K range. So players with 40 to 60 big blinds, I want to be playing against them because it's a PKO tournament. I want to try to get those bounties, and they can't hurt me that much. So if I end up getting entangled in some sort of murky situation with one of these players, the worst that can happen is I would lose and end up right around a starting stack again. Now, to be clear, I don't want that to happen. Things have been going great. I'm not trying to make that happen, but knowing that that's the worst case scenario versus half of my opponents is, to me, incentive enough to want to get in there. That combined with the fact that I wasn't that intimidated yet, at least, by anyone's playing style at my table. I didn't think that I was up against any secret wizard, online crusher, world beater type. It just felt like a bunch of mortals and me, and I happen to be running pretty good early. So that's why we're playing. We open ace 8 of clubs from the hijack. We make it 2,500. And on our immediate left, the player in the cutoff flat calls. Now, normally that would be like a red flag, like sirens going off in my head, like, oh, this guy should have a really strong hand. But this player, he's a little different. He's just basically a loose passive type. I believe he was Hungarian. He was from a foreign country for sure. I think it was Hungary. And he doesn't exactly need to have a super strong hand here. The reason why against another player the alarms will be going off in my head is because typically good players know that to the immediate left of the pre-flop raiser is actually the worst relative position to have, because everyone is likely to check to that raiser on the flop, and then he is likely to continuation bet, and then in that position, being on his immediate left, you will effectively have to act first. After that C bet, now you don't know what everybody behind you is going to do, and you have to guess about that. And that can just put you in a lot of bad spots. So a lot of us try to stay out of those spots unless our hand is strong enough to merit it. But for this guy, I mean, he could easily have something like Jack 9 suited or whatever and just doesn't want to fold. So I'm not too concerned about him, at least not yet. So he calls the 2,500. And the big blind, who is a loose aggressive type, who has already been bluffing a lot and getting caught a lot, calls from the big blind. Now he's only got about 79K behind after he calls. So there is now 9,000 in the pot, and we're going to see a flop three-handed, and we will be second to act. And it comes ace of spades, jack of hearts, deuce of clubs. Ace, jack, deuce, rainbow with one club, and that's important because we have the ace 8 of clubs. And the big blind checks. Now, what do you guys want to do? Does anybody want to check here on ace, jack, deuce? We've got top pair, no kicker really, 8 kicker. So checking is okay, but I just think that so many of my opponents' combos will have gut shots, hands like king queen, queen 10, king 10, like they're all in probably both of these players' ranges. So why should we give them that free card? And they would easily call us with those gut shots. They would definitely call us with second pair with a jack. So we've got enough value to squeak out of it that we might as well put in a little bet here and not let them see a free turn, and also get paid a little bit for our pair of aces. So I did bet small. I went down to 2250. Remember, pre-flop I had raised to 2,500, got 2 callers, and now I'm just betting 2250 into 9K. I'm really looking for value from those gut shots. I'm trying to get value from a hand like Jack 9, Jack 10, like those second pair type hands that would probably fold to a bigger bet because it's just much easier to put me on an ace when I bet more on a flop like this. So I really like my sizing here. I think 2250 is a really good bet, and only the big blind calls. So the cutoff folds and the big blind calls, and now we're going to see a turn card heads up, and with 13,500 in the middle, the turn comes the ace of diamonds, giving us trips for a board of jack, deuce, ace, ace. The big blind checks again. And do you think we should bet? When we bet so small on the flop, we're going to get action from so many weak hands like Jack 10, like I mentioned, or possibly even the gut shots. And if we bet now on the turn, even if we bet small again, we're very unlikely to get called by those hands. Well, yeah, some of the jacks would call another really small bet on the turn. But if I do bet the turn, I want to bet big and see if we can get him to pay us off with a worse ace. But the problem is my ace is one of the worst aces. It's only ace 8. It's right there in the middle. I don't really think we can get a whole lot of value. Sometimes we're going to be pipped. He'll be sitting there with ace 9, ace 10. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like betting on the turn makes a ton of sense. So I thought it was better to go for a little deception here. And so I just checked behind. Now my hand looks like maybe I just have a jack, or maybe I have pocket tens. So it's harder for him to put me on an ace when I check the turn. So that's what I do. And again, remember the profile of the big blind. The mistake that he makes the most from what I have observed thus far is that he bluffs too frequently. So we might as well try to set a little trap for him here and see if he sticks out a bet on the river. So the river is one of the best rivers I've ever seen. The 8 of spades for a final board of ace, jack, deuce, ace, 8, and giving us aces full of 8s. Now our opponent overbets the pot. He puts in 18,000 into the 13,500 pot. So we are very, very happy about this. I mean, what hands are we losing to anyway? I mean, really none. I don't believe that our opponent would just flat pre-flop with ace-jack. He's the type that would have almost certainly 3-bet that pre-flop, and probably should have, especially after it went raise call from these two loose idiots, myself and this Hungarian guy. So yeah, ace-jack is the nuts against our range. So he should have 3-bet. So I'm not too worried about being behind ace-jack. I don't know what other hand we should be worried about. We have the second nuts with the ace-8. We're very happy that he's overbetting the river, and we might as well be super optimistic here. Maybe he's got a full house of his own. Maybe he's even got pocket 8s. Maybe he's got pocket deuces, ace deuce. Like, these are the hands we want him to have now. So we may as well go for all the glory. And so he bets 18K with 58K behind, and we shove. And he tanks for less than 3 seconds and folds, which tells me he probably missed his gut shot and decided on a large sizing on the end, polarizing himself and basically running into the nuts. Well, that'll do it for this episode. I want to thank our sponsor, Liquid Death. Also, check out tournamentpokeredge.com and use the promo code podcast to save $10 off your first month of membership. For everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thank you so much for listening.
I wanna hold them like they do in Texas Plays. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Lock in intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love, it's not rough, it isn't fun. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got.